Good morning, everybody. My name is Hans Petersen, and we welcome you to this special session on the application of asset management in integrated water management. It is a co-organized session with the British Environment Agency and with the Dutch Rijkswaterstaat. And the background is that within Rijkswaterstaat we have a philosophy that we can learn from other government agencies on topics where we have the same issues like asset management. And the fact is that asset management, as it is, the experience within the UK is about 10 years, and within Rijkswaterstaat about 6 years. The Environment Agency started in applying this to water management, and in the Netherlands we started to apply asset management to our highways, and we are now in the stage that we are going to apply that also for in our water management. Now, asset management, as you know, it's maybe a new term for what we used to call operations and maintenance, but it is more than that. Well, just to introduce, can I have the next sheet, please? The speakers. Peter Kruitwagen will give an introduction of the meaning of asset management, just the definition. And then Dave Dennis will introduce the current practices within the UK, within the Environment Agency, followed by a presentation by Saskia Lichthart, who will introduce the current practices and state of play within Rijkswaterstaat. And then we intend to have a breakout session. We'll have to see how this works out, but we have, can I have the next sheet, please? We have defined 5 issues. You can read them there. They will be back on the screen when we're there. Issues we'd like to discuss. Why we'd like to discuss them is that the intention of this special session is to see if we can form a international community of practice regarding the application of asset management into integrated water management. So that's the final goal. Okay, for now, because we have only 1.5 hours, and I'd like to introduce Peter Kruitwagen.
Thank you, Hans. Also, good morning from me. I assume you've all come to the congres because you're interested in flood management, flood risk management, and I will be boring you with asset management. I'll give you as Hans said, I will give you a short introduction on the concept. I think the concept is also applicable to flood risk assets just as well as housing estates or banks or anything else. After the short introduction, I'll tell you some of the latest developments in the way we at the Rijkswaterstaat look at the subject of asset management. And finally, I'll show you an example of what kind of results these methods will deliver. The example won't be on flood risk, but on the availability of fresh water during low discharges. For the simple reason I didn't have a flood risk example available in time. So what is asset management? The definition of asset management, stolen from Wikipedia, it's a systematic process of operating, maintaining, upgrading and disposing of assets with the objective of providing the required service cost effectively. Key issues, key words in this definition are the systematic process. This involves both money, knowledge, people who are aware of their role in the process. Another one is life cycle, as in maintaining, upgrading and disposing of assets. Some say, and I agree on that issue, that also planning, designing and building of assets is part of asset management. In the Netherlands we started it just as a method of maintaining and upgrading. Next is the required service. Asset management is only possible if there is an understanding between all parties involved on the services and the service levels that are required. And finally, the cost effectiveness of your methods and operations, which is, I think, ancient. That's not new. We always try to maximize results with minimizing costs. That's general engineering practice. So what is new? Traditional approach in infrastructure is a focus on design, building and maintaining of constructions, with basically a maintenance scheme that is based on the design criteria. And nowadays it shifts to a focus on the performance and risk in relationship of functionality of the construction of its lifespan, where the demands for functionality and therefore of its performance may very well vary in time. It doesn't necessarily mean, if you change to asset management methods, that your maintenance schemes change drastically. They may or they may not. Main issue is that what changes is the way we look at the maintenance schemes and the goals they achieve. Basically, asset management has to do with finding the balance between costs, performance and risk. Risk is not necessarily being the risk of flooding, it's a risk of not achieving the required service or performance. And to find this balance and be accountable, we have found at Rijkswaterstaat it is a very good thing when, at least in responsibilities, you recognize the different roles of asset owner, mainly involved with costs, the asset manager involved with risk, and the service provider who actually delivers the performance. Often this will be different organizations or different departments within an organization, but that's not necessarily so. Yet it's vital, even within an organization or a work group, to recognize these three different roles exist. Also, to be able to implement this systematic asset management processes, it helps to have a comprehensive schedule of these processes. Implementation requires work on both strategical, tactical and operational levels with regards to both objectives and standards, plans and contracts. And for the Dutch Rijkswaterstaat, we have developed such a schedule, which I will just show you. I will not go into detail, it's rather complex. And the complexity is also in the fact that all the parts of the schedules are interconnected and interdependent. Rather recent development in our thinking is that we are trying to relate policy objectives to the maintenance of the constructions itself. The focus is generally on the maintenance of the infrastructure, dikes, dams, storm surge barriers, weirs, levees and whatever. Also sand replenishments along the coast in the Dutch circumstances. Maintenance will generally cost money, and the politicians will have to generate the money. But they want to achieve their own goals. And their goals is generally not a well-maintained system as such, but more likely, in the case of the flood risk, a certain level of safety. So translation from policy objectives to maintenance levels is needed. This safety level must be delivered through the functionality of a system. There does the policy objectives meet the system functionality. And systems can be a storm surge barrier combined with dikes, or the sandy coast with its beaches and dunes, or another system will be a riverbed with dams, dikes and weirs. And the system functionality will usually be formulated in terms as ability to discharge excess water for the river system. Together with the policy objective, like safety against river floods must exceed 1 in 1250 years, as it is in the Dutch circumstances. This will give you the functional demands of the system. The functional demands on the water system in the Netherlands, on the river system, is it must be able to discharge 16,000 cubic meters per second without exceeding water level X at location Y. And from these functional demands, the performance demands of a single construction is derived. And with a performance demand, you can think of the reliability of the weir at Driel, for instance, a place along the river, to open when river water exceeds level X must be 1 in 100. And in order to achieve this performance, with a given uncertainty, a risk, will require a certain maintenance level. That's how we're trying to interconnect all these parts and come from policy objectives to maintenance levels. And on the theoretical basis, one might argue that systematically, from the functional demands on the system, you first have to do the functional demands of the construction before you go to the performance demands. And that's right, but I tried to keep the sheet as simple as possible. I'll have an example. The example is the fresh water supply to the southwest of the Netherlands. Whereas the policy objective stated in several reports is have enough water available for agriculture in the southwest during dry spells. And we've translated that to a system functionality. At all times, a minimum of 30 cubic meters per second should be delivered to the southwest. Mind you, that is fresh water, where else the sea would be far easier. There's the sea, that's the southwest, and the fresh water flows in from the rivers, comes from Swiss over here through Germany to the Netherlands. And there are several assets in the water management system needed to guide the water from here all the way here, also here and there. So what do we need next? Next, we've made a list of possible investments in these assets. Oops. Excuse me, I think my fingers are just a little bit big. All the investments on this asset are over here, this one are over here. So you can imagine every asset has got its own list of possible investments, which can also be maintenance investments. And for each of the investments, the cost needs to be known. For each of these investments, the improvement of performance of the actual asset must be known. And then you can calculate the performance of the system from the performance of the individual assets, depending on the way they are interconnected, if there is redundancy or if it's an inline system. And then what you do is you sort all these investments on cost effectiveness for the functionality of the whole system, which will give you a result like this. Alas, it's in Dutch. The study was in Dutch originally. There are two graphs. The blue one gives the water supply to an area of Vallei and Eem, that's in the center of Holland. The red one for another area, which is Amstel-Gooi-Vecht, near Amsterdam. On the horizontal axis, you see the total costs of the investments in thousands of euros. And vertical, as a decision factor, is the number of days we do not achieve the goal of 30 cubic meters per second. The number of days on a yearly basis. And these results are based on an actual assessment of the condition and reliability of the assets as they are now. So the 2 and the 5 days is what we generally, on average, those are the days we lack the supply of water according to the 30 cubic meters per second level. So you can see it's not really rocket science, but especially in this area where we have to analyze all the investments, it's just a very big job, a lot of work. So far, my introduction on asset management, recent developments, and a little example. I would like to ask Dave to tell us what's been done in the UK.
Good morning. My name's Dave Denness. I work for the Environment Agency. I'm a senior advisor in asset management. I'll try to talk to you about the development of asset management in the Environment Agency, where we've come from, why we've done what we've done, and put that into context so that you can see why we perhaps might be slightly different to other organisations and countries. Thank you. Okay, the Environment Agency was formed in 1996. It brought together quite a number of other bodies from the UK, or England and Wales, and we are the main environmental regulator for England and Wales. It's not the whole of the UK, it's just England and Wales. And we have an overview responsibility for all of flood risk in England and Wales. We have specific responsibilities, operational responsibilities for flood risk from main rivers and the sea. Smaller watercourses and other sources of flood risk are dealt with by internal drainage boards, local authorities and other bodies. So within the Environment Agency at the moment, asset management is primarily concerned with management of flood risk from main rivers and the sea. We also have assets that relate to our other functions on navigation, fisheries, water quality and so on. And the hope is that we will bring those assets into our asset management function in due course, but for the moment I'm talking about flood risk assets. One thing to be aware of with the Environment Agency in England and Wales is that we have permissive powers to do works with assets, but we don't have any duties to do so, generally speaking. So in some ways that gives us freedom to spend money where we want to spend it, need to spend it, but it brings a responsibility to, spend that money in the best place. So a little bit of background about the Environment Agency. So what sort of assets do we have? Are we looking after? Well, first of all, it says it up there really. We've got about 11,000 kilometres of flood defences, 40,000 individual structure assets, and about 33,000 kilometres of channel that we maintain in some way or other. Now, when I say we maintain and we have, only about 50% of those assets are maintained by the Environment Agency. The others are maintained by third parties, although they still form part of the assets to protect from flooding from main river and the sea. So they're integral to our assets. They help to reduce risk from main river and the sea, but they're not maintained by the Environment Agency. We use our regulatory powers to encourage the other owners and maintainers to do what they need to do. It says there that the general types of assets we've got: raised defences, flood walls, culverts, outfalls, managed channels. Reservoirs, we are actually, the Environment Agency is the biggest undertaker of reservoirs in England and Wales. Surprisingly, you might think it's a water company, but it's actually the Environment Agency. We have 200 reservoirs that we use for flood storage purposes. And there's some kind of pictures there of the types of assets, and they range in scale from small walls, embankments to the Thames barrier, natural assets such as dune systems, pumping stations, some new, some old, and so on. Data about these assets is stored on a system called NFCDD, the National Flood and Coastal Defence Database. We'll talk about that in a moment, but we're in the process of replacing NFCDD right now within the next month or two. We carry out a large number of inspections every year, over 150,000. That's on a risk-based approach. Some assets are inspected every 6 months, others at different frequencies up to a maximum of 5 years, and that's a visual inspection. I'll explain a little bit why we do that inspection in a moment, why our focus is on those inspections. To manage our assets, we've divided them into systems, what we call flood risk management systems, and a system is the assets that protect or provide a service to a particular location, about 3,300, and we group them according to the consequence of a failure in the system. If a lot of people will be affected, a lot of property will be flooded, then that's a high consequence system, and we have medium and low consequence systems. If I just talk to you for a moment about the evolution of asset management in the Environment Agency, we generally have a process of kind of continuous improvement, gradual improvements to gradually try to get better. But sometimes there are external influences that cause you to make a big step. And I think the first one of these that I can recall was a very major flood that we had in the UK in 1998, which was only 2 years after the Environment Agency formed. There was many people flooded, many people who had never flooded before flooded, new developments flooded, new housing estates, new factories, they flooded. So it's a big wake-up call for us, and there was a review into that flood, very in-depth review. It came with lots of recommendations about flood warning and better gauging of river levels and so on. But for asset management, there was one thing that happened that influenced the way we've taken forward asset management. Within Northampton, there were some defences that, Northampton was a town at the time which had a lot of development going on, and in one case, a defence had been moved by a developer, and because of that, flooding happened to various depots of the local council, so they couldn't respond to the emergency properly. And really that instance has taken us down the line of being much more involved with regular inspections rather than detailed inspections. So as a result of that review, the big step change was we were given some targets by government to, first of all, set up a database of all flood risk management assets in England and Wales, carry out regular risk-based inspections of all those assets, and report nationally to our government on the state of those assets, on the defences. Now that took us quite a long time to work to develop how we would do that, and we've learned a lot since. There's also, in terms of step changes, there's been a number of floods since the Easter 1998 floods, which we've learned from as we've gone along, particularly the 2007 flood. But we've also had changes in legislation that have affected the way we do things, and as well as that, our government has scrutinised what we do through what we call the National Audit Office, who are, scrutinise what public bodies do. So we had several visits from them who've, pushed us along the way in terms of asset management, particularly around being able to describe what we do, the benefits of what we do much better by having better data, better systems to report what we do. Other things that are influencing, causing us to change right now, of course, we've got a climate of reduced funding, very much reduced funding, and also, of course, across the whole thing is climate change, what will be the effect of that on our assets in the future. So we found it very helpful. What is asset management? We found it very helpful to have a simple vision of asset management 5 or 6 years ago, which we could explain to people. And I'm sure you've all seen similar things to this. It's about knowing what assets you've got, where they are, their condition, how they perform. Then it's about knowing what assets do you actually need. Do you need to dispose of some of your assets? Do you need new assets? It's about knowing what investment you need to maintain those assets sustainably. And it's also about what you can afford to do, and then going on and planning to do that, carrying it out efficiently, and being able to crucially report on what you've done and the effectiveness of what you've done. We developed some tools quite early on to help us with this, which one of them was around, particularly around visual inspections. We quickly realised that in order to inspect all our assets regularly, we needed some consistent processes. So we set out a condition assessment manual which has been updated since then. That gives, it's a simple, in concept it's a simple manual, pictures of each condition grade, a description, the kind of key features that impact on the performance of an asset. Because although we're looking visually at the asset, we're not concerned with how nice it looks. We're looking to identify the visual features that affect the performance of the asset. So that's one of the tools that we use. We also put a lot of effort into training our inspectors so that all inspections are carried out by accredited inspectors, and they have ongoing re-accreditation. And we also had tools for working out the risk-based frequency that I mentioned earlier. Another key tool that we came up with early on was the system asset management plan. And I did mention, we group our assets into systems. Now, what the system asset management plan does, it stands halfway between all of the detailed asset data on NFCDD and the high-level policy plans and strategies that set the direction of how you manage flood risk over the next 50 or 100 years. The SAMP sits between those two levels, and I saw quite a lot of parallels with what you talked about, Peter. But yes, the system asset management plan is a live document. It links directly, or it's a live system. It links directly with the assets. So as asset conditions change, it changes the SAMP. And within the SAMP, very similar to what you spoke about, for each asset there is a view as to the maintenance that asset needs to have, when that needs to happen, and the costs of that. So nationally, we can bring all the SAMPs together in the system and report nationally on what the investment needs are now and into the future. So that's one of our real key tools in asset management in the Environment Agency. As well as individual key tools, it's important. You can develop things individually, but you've got to keep a big picture of where you want to be in asset management. So we developed a strategy in 2006-07, which kind of showed where we as an organisation wanted to move to and how we wanted to move towards being an asset management organisation. And we realised that there was lots and lots that we had to do, lots of individual activities that fitted into that very simple asset management circle. I don't expect you to read this, but this is a page from our asset management strategy, which is available on our website. Well, it's the update to our strategy. We updated it last year, and this is the plan of all the activities that we'll have to do to become an asset management organisation in 5 years' time. The importance of this is that most of those squares represent some change that the organisation has to implement. And if you did all of those at once, the organisation wouldn't be able to have the capacity to take those on. So you've got to plan ahead, and that's why what the strategy does, it shows when we're intending to do individual bits of change so that the business can manage the implementation of those changes. So I'm probably running over time here, but the strategy covers, sorry, if I just go back, we've divided the strategy into five themes. They're right down the edges: operating assets, maintaining our assets, working with the third-party owners, and building, improving new assets. So we do include that within our kind of asset management framework, and developing the skills and knowledge within the people that actually need to do the asset management. So lots and lots of individual activities. There's just one, and that's work in progress. I mentioned we were replacing our database with a new system called AIMS, asset information management system. Our old NFCDD is 10 years old now, so it's, any information system that's 10 years old will be creaking and not fit for purpose in today's world. AIMS, we took the opportunity to reclassify our data, which is a really big step. Took a lot of work, but we think our classification is now fit for the future. We can bring in other asset types from navigation or fisheries into that classification. So we think that's now fit for the future. AIMS is a phased approach. Phase 1, which we're introducing shortly after New Year, will support the inspection process, largely support the inspection process that NFCDD does. But future phases are key to our, how we see things going forward, and particularly key to the efficiencies that we have to make due to the cost or due to the budget restraints. One of the efficiencies that we have to make, or what we're aiming to make through AIMS, is efficiencies around programming and scheduling of work, and that will be a key part of the next phase of AIMS. As well as that, we just mention our research and development programme. Quite a lot of projects within the theme of sustainable asset management, but one of the key ones is called asset performance tools. I'm glad Jonathan's in the audience here, so he can field any technical questions on this one, or perhaps not. No, sorry, Jonathan. But yes, this is really about developing a framework for more detailed inspections, more detailed asset management. So, and it's based around an asset information system. So for the majority of our assets, we're in the green. We hope to be in the green zone. Low risk assets, we kind of know how they perform. It's fairly obvious what maintenance needs to be done, so we don't need to do a lot of in-depth work on them. So we're in a kind of green area of this propeller diagram, but the framework will show us where we need to go, to more detailed assessments, more detailed inspections, more detailed decision making around our assets. So that's kind of where we're going for the future. And I guess with our visual inspection programme, our approach, we are probably focusing on the green area now, and we'll move out to the more detailed inspections. I suspect other organisations may be more in the kind of more detailed approaches now, and maybe moving towards some of the greener areas. So that was really all I wanted to say just at the moment. So we hand over to Saskia. Are we doing questions now, or?
Yeah, maybe when there are questions about your presentation.
Yeah. Any immediate questions? There'll be opportunity to ask any questions later, but if there's any kind of immediate questions, we can leave them till after Saskia. No. Over to you, Saskia.
Okay, I will tell you something about how we are going on with the implementation of asset management at Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands. Peter Kruijtwagen told you already something. I will go a bit further on what kind of instruments we develop and how we implement a new perspective on asset management in our management cycle. First, I will tell you a bit about what is Rijkswaterstaat managing very shortly. I don't took the slide with me with how many hydraulic structures we have and how many kilometers of canals and rivers, but you can see that on our website. Then I will go further a bit on reasons for introducing new asset management principles at Rijkswaterstaat. Then I will tell you something about our working process in asset management, and that's all about making a connection between planning processes at different levels. To make that connection, we need certain instruments, frameworks. Peter Kruijtwagen told you already something about it. And then I will end up my presentation with some issues in the implementation of asset management. Rijkswaterstaat area of management. We are responsible to manage 3 national infrastructure networks, the highway network, but also the main waterway network and the main water system. And within those networks you find different assets. And we try to apply the asset management principles on the 3 networks. The networks differ, but the approach we want to make as similar as possible. When you go to further details, of course, there are quite some differences between the highway network and the main water system. Here I summed up some strategic issues in asset management which motivated us to improve our approach to asset management. The same as in the UK, budgets are getting smaller. At the same time, the public demands high quality infrastructure, low risks. At the same time as well, an increasing amount of our assets are facing end of lifetime. In the Netherlands, for the hydraulic structures, for example, in the main water system, we started to build them in 1910 of the former century. A lot of structures are built in the 20s and 30s, and of course our delta works. Then Rijkswaterstaat, we are not performing operations and maintenance. Operations we do ourselves, but maintenance and building of infrastructure is done by market parties, and so we are facing a progressive market involvement, and we are taking more and more distance. We don't ask them to perform certain tasks, but we ask them to deliver a certain performance. The reason for that strategy of procurement is that we like to profit as much as possible also of innovative capacity of market parties, and cut on budgets at the same time. And we were faced with the transformation of the relationship between the Ministry of Infrastructure and Rijkswaterstaat. We became an agency, a governmental agency, in 2006, and this means that there's a more severe split up between policy making and implementation of policy, and also the maintenance and the operational work Rijkswaterstaat is doing, and we have a more business-like relationship with our ministry, which is in the role model Pieter Kruitwagen showed you in his presentation. The Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment is the asset owner. We as Rijkswaterstaat are the asset manager, and market parties are the service providers. Like Peter told you as well, at Rijkswaterstaat we started to apply those new principles on asset management on our maintenance process. And the maintenance work of Rijkswaterstaat is also organized a bit different than the process around building of infrastructure. And for our maintenance task, we have a service level agreement with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment. And for our building task, the steering from the ministries is more project per project. So they are closer steering on the building of new infrastructure, and the maintenance tasks we make an agreement with them for the whole package each 4 years. Then yearly we have a kind of reallocation of maintenance budget and specific tasks, and the contracting out is going continuously, and contracts have a longer time frame, more and more, because the tasks we are giving to the market are bigger. And what we try to do with our new approach on asset management is also that we try to connect as much as possible these different processes. And that means that the service level agreements we have with our ministry, we use the input of the yearly programming of tasks. We have to sum that up and translate it on the risk we will manage for the coming 4 years and the performance we will deliver. And that has to do with what I told you about why we are implementing asset management, as there are cuts on budgets. We have a more business-like relationship with our ministry. That means you have to show more transparency in what you do and translate all those maintenance measures in a societal performance you can connect to costs. And when the asset owner, the ministry tells you we will have to cut on budget, that you can tell him, okay, you want a cut in budget, but this means that the performance of that part of the infrastructure will diminish in this way, and often that means that you have a higher risk. So, for example, there's a higher risk that our discharge of water will not stay conform the policy objectives. So at the level of the negotiations between Rijkswaterstaat and the ministry, you need that kind of language. You can't discuss with them, well, when you cut budget, we won't do measure X or Y, and that motivated us to develop new instruments for asset management. At the same time, we would like to, the way we steer the market parties, you need another language as well. We want to steer them more on a performance level than a task level as well. This is the framework Peter showed you already. To be possible to connect those different working processes we distinguish in asset management at Rijkswaterstaat. You can see here the contract size. We have our service level agreements with the asset owner, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment, and we would like to connect our internal programmation of measurements tasks with those service level agreements. So our internal planning has to be summed up to be possible to make a service level agreement, and the service level agreement has to be translated into contracts with market parties as well. And to being able to make those connections, we discerned several tactical frameworks, kind of manuals we needed to being able to make those connections. And I sum them up here. And I will go a bit further on that. In yellow you see one of the main tactical frameworks we are developing right now, and that's a performance regime. Peter told you already a lot about that. The performance regime is necessary to make the translation between policy, objectives, functionality, the demanded functionality of the systems and the assets which are forming this system or infrastructural network. And what we try to do is, when we know the performance that is needed of each asset or group of assets, we try to link that with the maintenance strategy we use. In our former way we did asset management, we had already those maintenance strategies, but now we try to translate those maintenance strategies, or to connect those maintenance strategies to the societal performance we deliver with it, or the measure of risk we control with it. And that's a new development, and quite a challenging development, because it is not always monitored what kind of performance different assets are delivering, and it's also not always monitored what kind of maintenance tasks are performed. And we are looking for kind of causal relationship. It's not rocket science, but you want to get more grip of this part. And then when so what we do now is that those reference maintenance strategies, we have them for different classes of assets, and we try to make the connection there to the demanded performance. And those reference maintenance strategies are then a manual, or how do you call it? A framework guiding the maintenance plans our regional offices make for specific assets. And to develop those frameworks, we use methods and tools that are developed in the science of asset management. You could say systems engineering, working with RAMS. RAMS is a special language to translate societal demands to hydraulic structures and infrastructural assets. The R is reliability, the A is availability, maintainability, and safety. We use risk analysis and modeling, because I told you we don't have we have some monitoring data, but we have to base our new maintenance strategies connected to performance and risk also on a lot of modeling work. And we use life cycle costing methods to calculate budgets. So it's not only the yearly budget, but we look at the assets for the whole lifetime. I also have an example of part of this performance regime. This is an example which tells almost the same as Peter told you. You have a policy goal on flood protection. This you can translate to a function demand, protection against floods to maximum 3 meters, plus our new Amsterdam, I don't know the word in English, PAIL. And then we try to translate that to the performance we ask of a specific assets. In this example, our storm surge barrier. As I already told you, we have reference maintenance strategies for different groups of assets. Because we already had those strategies, our classification is based on technical characteristics. And what I think is interesting, what you told me, you can also classify your assets in another way. For example, high risk or low risk for performance. And what we do now is that we, per class of assets, we make this distinction. So, for example, of our sluices, those specific sluices are have to deliver a higher performance than another class. But that's the renewal we have to make in our reference strategies. And then we use maintenance plans, like I already told you. These are giving an overview of the maintenance tasks you have to do during the lifetime of specific assets, including inspection. And then our service level agreements, what the renewal is at that level, is that we try to offer a choice to our asset owner. And as I told you already, we try to sum up all the maintenance tasks and translate that to the kind of performance we deliver. And for example, for the service level agreement we just prepared and will start in 2013, we offered the asset owner for our main water system this choice. We could continue the actual combined maintenance need, like we did in the earlier period. But what we can also do is that we put more money on guaranteeing reliability of water supply, discharge and storage at a cost of coastal zone protection. And we also calculated what that meant in terms of budget and in performance. So we have two different strategies of maintenance. And then we have three main indicators of performance. You see in the first column, and we made an estimation of the performance for the flood protection coastal zone. And then we have our second main indicator is flood protection delivered by our storm surge barriers. And then our third main indicator is water supply and discharge. And when they would like to choose for option 1, then you see the coastal zone protection is up to 90%. When they choose for option 2, then that one is going down, and they win something on the water supply and discharge. And you see that there are some small budget differences in the different choices they can make. Then I end my presentation by summing up some issues in the development of all those new instruments. Like I told you already, it's quite some work to find indicators for network performance and especially translate performance of the network as a whole to the different assets which are form part of it. Then the translation of network performance to risk-based maintenance strategies. And then, I will come back to that. This also has consequences for how we distribute responsibilities within our organization. It needs a lot of new kind of monitoring and information systems to being able to close the plan, do, check, act cycle. And now we have to base a lot of our instruments on modeling, but you would like to test those models as well in what's happening in reality. And it also applying those new instruments means a transition process. So you ask other tasks of your employees. And we also have a kind of implementation plan, like I saw from the UK. But what we also have developed in cooperation with the Technical University of Delft is a so-called maturity check. They have they discern different indicators to measure the maturity of an organization in applying new asset management principles. Unfortunately, this is in Dutch, and the text is hard to read, but I will explain a bit the indicators. It's information management, internal connection of processing, our external relations with the asset manager and asset owner, how we deal with market parties and contracts, decision making in asset management, processes and role, and culture and people. And the yellow lines is where Rijkswaterstaat stands now, given those different indicators. And the head of Rijkswaterstaat wants us to be on a level 4. I think was the end 2015. And as you see, for example, how we deal now with our ministry, we made a big leap there. But processes and roles is a bit weak. So we know now where we have to put the extra effort in. And yeah, after I think next year there will be a new maturity check. And then we will see whether we improved a bit on our implementation of asset management. Thank you. Other questions?
So far, yes. Other questions? Okay, I'll just. I think this is video recorded, but we will just use the microphone now. Could you please state your name and organization?
So it's Jonathan Sim from HR Wallingford. A very interesting presentation. Obviously, I'm more aware of the UK situation. I was just trying, as you were talking, I was trying to draw some parallels between what you had said and what Dave had presented. I have one main question, but just before that, I just had a question about the relative role of the Rijkswaterstaat and the water boards. So as I understand, you have about, in total in the Netherlands, about 13,000 kilometres of defences, but only about 3,000 are the responsibility of Rijkswaterstaat. Mm-hmm. So do you have service agreements with the water boards?
No.
Or that's completely outside of your area of responsibilities?
Yeah, it's outside our area of responsibility, except, and Peter maybe can tell more about that too. We have our, how you call it, high water protection program, and this means this is a big inspection program of all the flood defenses, dikes. No, that's but the infrastructure of the water boards in FloodRisk. And that's our dams and dikes. Yeah.
There are dams, dikes, and a single storm surge barrier at Ramspol that are operated by the water boards.
Yeah.
Actually, the service level they need to deliver has been put down in law.
Yeah.
And also in law, it's been regulated that they have to inspect every 6 years and deliver a report to the minister. That goes through a long way. It starts at the water boards, go to the provincial government, and then go to the national government. And the role of Rijkswaterstaat is just to do a quality check on those reports. Otherwise, we don't have a real responsibility in regard with the water boards. We do, however, cooperate with the water boards when it comes to improving dams, dikes, and constructions, as up until recently, it was so that the cost for maintenance came to the water boards themselves, but costs of improvements were funded by the national government. And then we had a controlling voice in how the money was spent.
Yeah. and what I told you about our asset management processes, the improvement of the assets of the water boards in FloodRisk is a program that is put a part of those service level agreements. And I think in future maybe we will have to integrate that more.
So that sounds a bit similar to, in fact, the relationship between the Environment Agency and some of the other operating authorities, where the agency takes an overview role of that.
Yeah.
My other point that I just wanted to make, I don't want to hog the microphone, but the question of performance is an interesting question. I think we've had a lot of discussion about that in the UK. Clearly, I mean, one of the differences between the UK and the Netherlands is that the Netherlands tends to do its benefit cost assessments on an infrequent basis and then sets the protection standards in law as a result of those benefit cost assessments, whereas in the UK we do that on a sort of a live kind of basis. And so risk and performance to us are very tightly tied together. So at the simple level, the kind of visual inspections that Dave was talking about is one kind of risk level approach that you're just using from visual inspection. But we've also been doing some work recently, which Jim will know about, is where we've been trying to look at the risk implication of, for example, not maintaining or not dredging our channels. Okay, so here what we've been trying to do is to use the National Risk Assessment Framework that I'm sure you're aware of, that we're using in the UK, to see what performance change you get in terms of increased risk if you don't invest in operations and maintenance. So for us, because we're so tied in the UK to benefit cost criteria, the whole question of evaluating risk, which is obviously in our case in pounds, because it's probability times consequence, is a very key part of that, and that also affects the way that national investment is allocated as well.
Yeah, that's the difference. We don't translate risk in costs. We compare performance to investment.
There are other criteria that are used, but that's the overriding one.
Yeah.
Saskia, on one of your slides you mentioned that you had some normalised maintenance costing information, and is that something you do automatically against your inventory of assets, or is that more in the form of guidance that people use to decide what costs are locally?
Yeah, we use those normalization schemes in our reference documents in our reference strategies. We are still working on that now, that per maintenance task we try to connect that to a database of cost, and this database contains costs in terms of labor, needed energy, and we try to connect those kind of costs to maintenance tasks, and that means that each maintenance task we have to translate in hours of labor needed for it, and other types of costs. And then when we have that kind of information in the reference documents, we expect the regional officers who are responsible for the maintenance plans that they use those kind of calculations for their budgets. And I think in future it would be wise because the programming of maintenance tasks comes from our regional offices, that we only accept budgets which are based on this normalization budgets. But that's the future.
Do you think there might be an opportunity? Do you think there might be an opportunity for us to share some of that information between the UK and the Netherlands?
Interesting. I think that's one of our goals today, to see what are interesting objects to exchange ideas on. Yeah.
I think as far as costs are concerned, it would be very interesting to compare methods of costing. However, we do have to realize that the price of labor and the price of materials may just vary a bit.
Yeah.
So it's not just a question of sending you a database based in copy. I'm afraid I would like to give you them, but that's.
I think they could be very dangerous numbers as well, so we'll have to be careful what we do with them.
Yeah.
Ours are in euros.
So, any more questions directly to one of the speakers? Yep.
Thank you. Mike Wallace from HR Wallingford. It was really a comparison that I was trying to draw between Netherlands and UK in quite a high-level view of things, in that Rijkswaterstaat have, you mentioned several responsibilities, not just flood risk, but water control, transportation, for example. And my interpretation of what you've been saying is that your asset management system covers all of those different types of assets.
Mm-hmm. And different types of functions.
In terms of the budgeting, is that divided out, or do you have to show the costs and benefits in combination with those different asset sets?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The reason I ask is because Dave and Jim, with the advent of AIMS, at the minute that asset base is flood defences. You talked about including other asset stocks for fisheries, navigation, etc. I was wondering whether, if depending on how the Netherlands do their costings for those different asset sets, as to whether there's anything possibly the UK could draw from that experience as to how mechanically that's done, and how they combine the costs and benefits of those asset sets, because they're very different, aren't they? I mean, you'll have pluses and minuses on both sides. If you do one thing to a flood defence, and it may change the water supply, for example, and that'll be a disbenefit to them, and how you balance all those competing requirements of your systems. I see that as a future dilemma, perhaps, but
yeah. And our ambition is even to be able to evaluate investments in the one main network and the other. But what complicates that is that the different departments in our ministry, they are responsible, the one for navigation and transport, and the other one for the water system. So they still want separate budgets for the different networks, and it's hard to weigh them against each other.
We have the same. We
Yeah.
have separate sums of money.
Yeah.
We have separate sums of money for navigation, for water resources, so we work within those budgets. But it's a little bit competitive, because you're bidding to government for a fixed sum of money that government has. So navigation is making its case, and flood risk is making its case, and we're sort of competing against each other to get the lion's share of the money. Perhaps not the most efficient way of working.
No.
It would be good to have some way of quantifying benefits across these areas of activity, so that it gives the government a more even-handed approach to allocating funds.
My point really, Jim, was if you're trying to demonstrate that your expenditure of the public purse is the most efficient, then it must take into account those different calls on those budgets.
Sure.
Because otherwise you say, well, you're giving me 3 billion to upgrade my defences, but it's going to be at the cost of navigation, for example, who are going to lose in the cost-benefit analysis. So.
Yeah. It's even more weird. We have a lot of hydraulic structures who both have a function in navigation, transport, and water discharge, and you have to account for different budgets in governmental budgets.
One of the things that we're hoping to get benefit from by bringing all of our asset information together is efficiency in the delivery of work on the ground. We can share resources, and we can make better use of our own staff and contractors by doing more things while they're in a particular location. We think that'll give us significant savings.
Yeah, and for us it is important to apply the same kind of asset management principles for the different network, because that makes comparisons and weighting the one against the other more easy.
Well, one thing we do have is that funding is not split up between water supply and flood risk. All of the funding that is maintenance funding, dus the service level agreement funding on a 4-yearly basis for the complete main water system, is just one budget. And as Saskia showed in her slide on the service level agreement, we offered the policymakers 2 alternatives. One of them, more funding towards fresh water supply during dry spells, but then that goes at the cost of coastal defense. And our case was that the Dutch coast has sort of an excess safety, because we've got the dune system, the beach system, and also we provide for about 40 to 60 million euros a year of sand in the foreshore. And we argued, well, we could do less of those foreshore replenishment during 4 years and put that money in improving your fresh water supply. However, we are not able to do this, to make it comparisons on cost effectiveness of both, or on performance indicators of both. But the performances, the functions of those 2 systems are different. And policymakers have a very, very hard time, to my experience, in deciding what they prefer, fresh water or safety. And of course, in the Netherlands, which is below sea level, safety always comes first.
Okay, are there any more questions? Then we give the microphone back to Hans.
Yep, thank you. What I explained in the beginning, we sort of together we came up with 5 specific issues. I mean, not maybe related to the discussion, but issues we could discuss in the context of the idea to have a international community of practice. I mean, the idea basically is that Rijkswaterstaat and the Environment Agency will in any case continue to exchange information on this issue, because we share the same challenges. We use slightly different methodologies. It's largely dependent on the history of our organizations and the choices which are made on the way we run our country. We have our water boards since 1200, so that's not something you change just overnight. And the UK has its own specificalities. Given this idea, I mean, what we are interested in, of course, is if we would create such an international community of practice. I mean, would there be other countries? I don't know if there are other countries or other organizations from other countries in the room now. I'm just curious, actually, who have maybe are confronted with similar challenges or use similar techniques. Just looking with a big question mark above my head now. Not really? Okay. Then, sorry? Yeah?
Well, the only comment that I would make is that you're aware, obviously, of the bilateral agreement between the US Army Corps of Engineers and the Rijkswaterstaat, and I think they're interested in extending that to a broader, international community of practice potentially. So, I think you'd be pushing at an open door if you looked at maybe the 3 organisations working together.
Well, that's yeah. Actually, I'm sort of the formal point of contact. Yeah. In managing this particular memorandum of agreement we have with the Army Corps, and at the last steering committee, in which both our leaderships were involved, we agreed to expand on the issue of asset management, and that was one. This on the topical point of view, and that we also would look if we could expand that with third parties. I mean, the limitation is that it be government organizations, or at least organizations closely connected to the government, like in our case Deltares, for instance.
Yeah, if I could just comment, Hans, we are hoping to sign our own agreement with the US Army Corps of Engineers, so I think that will help because it'll put us on the same footing as far as exchanging information. There's some sensitivity around some of the information, I believe. So I think America, Holland, and the UK can have a very constructive dialogue around asset management, and I know we're very keen to support that.
So yeah, I think that's the basic idea. Is to see if we can expand it. I mean, obviously, the more parties aboard, the more thought it will be given, and of course, you get at a certain stage, you probably get a sort of practical limitation of the number of countries or the number of organizations involved. But
potentially France might also be interested.
Well, that yes.
Given the collaboration that we've had on the concession levy handbook,
Yes.
I would be very surprised if they were not interested.
Well, that was you're just taking my next sentence, because I was just thinking the international levy handbook might be a sort of and the network which what was formed in putting this together, that might be a very, very nice network to use, actually. As I understand that the levy handbook is nearing completion. Well, it's never complete, of course, but it will.
Please come to the next session. No, I was just going to make the same point, really, that the International Levy Handbook is, an obvious vehicle for cooperation and asset management.
So if we have 5 minutes left. We just put these issues there. It deals a lot with risk, and it deals a lot with climate change adaptation scenarios. My idea is, because what we've seen, that we use similar approaches, filled in slightly different. So I think at the start I probably will have to focus on, to really understand the models we use and where the similarity is. So that's probably a very logical way to start. But then I think what is quite obvious, that that's the public and also the policy expectation, that we will be able to measure risks. We have aging assets. That's I think in both countries it's a very prominent one. I know in the United States, aging infrastructure is high on the agenda of the Obama government. Reality is sometimes probably something different, but that's one.
They have collapsing bridges.
Yeah, they even have collapsing bridges. Well, this is recorded, so be careful what we're saying here about the US. But and then of course we all face that's not a very quick one, but that deals with our investment scenarios that we have to adapt given the climate change scenarios. So if we are going to replace or maintain our infrastructure, there's always the question, what should we do given scenario X or Y? So that's I think another field we have to deal with. And I don't know if there's any sort of experience yet with this particular issue. It's difficult enough, I guess.
well, our policy is to try to adopt an adaptive approach, so that we don't close off options because of the uncertainty with climate change. We need to take steps now to manage flood risk, but keep the options open to see how the actual climate change predictions work out over the coming years.
Yeah. We have the same kind of adaptive strategy we are developing now. We have a kind of second Delta program, which is investigated what kind of investment we should make to be ready for climate change, and we try to connect that strategy to the replacement strategy we are developing for our aging infrastructure. And yeah, we just started with that program. One of the first steps now is that we try to estimate the rest lifetime of our assets, both in a technical way and in a functional way, for which we are using climate scenarios, socio-economic scenarios, and then you get different time frames for different assets, And that's the basis for the strategy we are going to develop.
Jonathan? Yeah, I'll just bring the microphone.
I was just reflecting that I think it was Piet Dirk when he was talking in one of the plenary sessions about the Flood Control 2015 project, and he spoke about the golden triangle of research institutes, government organisations and private companies in driving forward new developments. And so I'm actually very happy that this is being initiated by government organisations, because I think it has a lot more clout internationally when it's done that way. But I would encourage you to think about including the other two elements of the triangle in that community of practice as you set it up. The private companies who are actually at the coalface. I mean, you referred to them in your presentation as suppliers or people, service providers, and then the research institutes, because there needs to be quite a lot of thinking that goes into how you develop your frameworks and your tools that enable you to deliver that. So I would just urge you to think about that as you develop this together.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, Jonathan. I think one thing I've learned from the 4 days here, or the 3 days so far, is that there's an enormous amount of scientific research going on, really valuable stuff, but there's a jump between that research and making it operational. Asset managers, we are spending probably 90% of all the money in the world that's being spent on flood risk management in one way or another. So we've got to get the new science converted into a form that people can use. Maybe this sort of group could help to do that.
Yeah. And we have a nice start already tomorrow, because tomorrow we have an additional program on asset management where Jim and Dave will join us too. And fortunately, it's different to pronounce. We have there, I think, one person from a private company and also a PhD student from the University of Delft. So we have the start of the Golden Triangle tomorrow in Zeeland. And when there are other people interested in that program, then just contact Hans or me, because we still have some places in the car to travel from Rotterdam to Zeeland, but also we have room for some more participants.
Yeah, if there's an interest, well, there's I think 2 things. If you're interested, we have a makeshift list where you can state your name and affiliation regarding this community of practice. That's one. And indeed, what Saskia is saying, we together with the Environment Agency, we have a sort of special session tomorrow. Start of the community of practice. We're traveling by private car because Zeeland it's all water, so it's small roads, no public transport at all. Don't record this. But no, we're traveling by private car. So if I think there are 2 more spaces left, if you wish. We start very early, but we also end very early because of the train travel back of our British guests. So if there's an interest, please contact me, and we'll make sure that there's a possibility. So I think, given the time, we're at the end of this session. I thank you very much for your attention and your participation. And I guess we made a nice start with a new collaboration. Thank you.